and in the end, he and she are the same human beings, and it doesn't matter how hard he tries to discriminate against this fact because, in the end, this fact won't change. He starts laughing, and then, while putting his hand on his head, he asks about no difference between a noble like him and a commoner like her. And this is something a commoner like her shouldn't decide because this is something a noble like him should decide. While opening both arms, he declares that from the moment they are born, status, power, talent, wealth, fame, and all these things are different between him and her. And an arrogant commoner like her shouldn't even be uttering that they are equal. However, she thought, is he like this because of his pride? No, that's not it. There are different reasons why he is like this, just what happened for him to be in this state. The reason for his being like that was his past and thoughts where a skeleton holds Donovan from his back, saying he's bitter. His father is very bitter and resentful and takes vengeance against them for his father. And how dare they mutter that they are the same as him? The honorable nobles that wench and the commoners do not ever forgive them. Calling him his son, he orders him to kill those commoners as they are their enemies, and if he doesn't want to end up like his father, he will need to destroy them to their roots while tears are flowing from Donovan's eyes. After this, he shouts at her, saying it doesn't matter how much he tells her. A commoner like her would never understand. He talked about how they're equal, and then he will show her the difference between them. Romantica gets afraid to see magic gear in his hands and starts running. Seeing this, he says if she is a swordsman, he should fight like one. When she steps forward, a magic gear of fire suddenly gets at her side. She tries to put out that fire with her magic wind, but that fire explodes with Donovan's magic. Pram gets scared to see this from a distance, and then he shouts and worries for Romantica. There were two sides to Donovan, but at that time, his bad side was insisting he massacre the commoners. Pram rushes there to pick her up, gives her courage, and asks her if she is alright. She stands bravely and thinks before the explosion. If she hadn't used her magic and dispersed some of the force, she would have been in big trouble by now. Pram and Romantica were standing on one side, while Donovan and Percival were standing in front of them on the other side. Donovan tells Percival to stay away as he will take them on, so go and rest. While saying this, he quickly moves toward Romantica and Pram to attack them. Seeing this, the Romantic asks Pram if he can cover for her because she needs to recover some of her mana. From far away, Donovan attacks with his magic at the Pram while Romantica calls his name loudly with fear. But Donovan jumps from that smoke, and she gets scared to see how Donovan is jumping high. When Donovan, in anger, jumped again in an explosion to kill Pram while Percival was shouting. And when he looked down to see him, Pram attacked him from behind with his rapier, but he could hardly save himself. However, the fight between them continued. Pram shot him, cut his moth with his sword, and blood fell while he shouted at the filthy commoner. After this, Percival asks him what he is doing, as he told him before that Pram is his opponent, and asks if he wants to fight him so they can both fight together. He angrily replies it's just two useless commoners. There's no need for him to join. Romantica jumped down from the aside and came near Pram while asking if he was okay with this. He nodded yes, saying this tall person, his views were abnormally narrow. Also, he didn't even bother to look at his surroundings. His statement was entirely focused on her, but thanks to that, he could land a blow on his cheek. Standing behind Pram, she thinks about what she should do since she has no mana. There's no chance of her winning against him. Also, with her current state, she will be a burden for Pram. After this, she asks Pram if he can take that spiky-haired woman someplace else. He replies that he can. But why is she asking? She thinks, clenching her fists, that Donovan is her opponent and she will take him by herself, and then she says it will also be better for him to fight that spiky-haired guy on one. Pram replies that if she talks like that, she can have more confidence because she is scared and sweat is pouring down her face. Seeing this, he asks her if she will ask him to do something like that with that facial expression. Then she won't be able to convince him to leave her. And then he relaxes her by saying she doesn't have to worry about that because they're a team fighting with Mr. Desire. After hearing his words, she remembers when Desire told her not to worry too much, and even if she felt like she was in danger, she still had him. While retaining his words, she thinks while clenching her fists tightly, how could she forget that fact? She gets happy, and with a smile, she says Desire is annoying. After this, when she gets relaxed, she asks for sorry by saying she was acting weak, and now she is with him. After this, they both get ready to step forward. On the other side, a fight continued between Adjust and Desire. She walloped him while lying on the floor and told him to get up, but that wasn't enough to knock him out when he said stone break. Suddenly, a stone broke and moved toward Adjust. She could hardly save herself, but one stone severely hit her arm and turned into a snake. However, while using her magic, she closed her winter fist, and these snakes froze while Desir from far away. He analyzed her magic while saying it was his greeting present for her. Did she like it? Then, while holding his arm, he attacked and explored her magic, telling her to get started now. He analyzes her whole magic while flying in the air. She tries to attack him with a winter crash, but every attack fails him. He explores her magic, so she falls to the ground. While falling, she thinks there should be a limit to his magic analysis. She attacks him again with her winter crash, but gets angry to see how he's absorbing her magic. Doing this, he strikes her back and falls her away on the ground by saying she is truly unique, and he thinks it's hard to believe she didn't suffer any damage. Her strength is overwhelming. She said she didn't get it. Her mana, magic speed, and battle experience were above his S. Can't she seem to defeat him? At this, he replies with a smile that she doesn't have to be so nervous after all, their battle has just begun. She thinks in surprise that it's the fact that she is more substantial than him in every single aspect, and what she doesn't have and what Desir has. However, she doesn't want to admit it, but the difference between them is that he has far more superior knowledge and experience than her. She says while taking a deep breath that if she is going to be pushed back in a battle of magic, then so be it. Speaking of this, she says she will fight him in close combat. However, he replies to her by saying he was expecting that to happen, and then he attacks her with his sliding icy road infinitely gliding force. Still, she jumps up thinking, don't try to drag this fight out any longer, and attack him with her sword, while modifying balance and reinforcing strength. He blocks her attack with his sword. She asks him in surprise how he stopped her attack. At this, he asks why he is so surprised just because he is a mage. Did she expect his close combat to be weak? She thinks with a teary face just how far ahead he has planned. Then she angrily slams her sword into his sword with such force that he falls away. After this, she says she doesn't expect him to have come up with so many countermeasures. He replies while standing that well, to tell her the truth, his limit is about 5 minutes. She is surprised to hear this and wonders why. Even if there is a difference in experience, a magic swordsman like her can't defeat him. She runs toward her to attack him, and when he tries to block her attack, she strikes him and falls him away. But he stands up again, holding a sword in hand. She gets surprised to see this and thinks, even though she is more substantial than him, so why can't she beat him? After this, he says while tearing off his shirt that at least she is enjoying herself, and then she surprisingly asks him the meaning of enjoying herself. He explained to her that an opponent that could rival her was probably no one that could achieve that feat, and the warrior that hated losing also for countless years, no one could compete against her. Because of that, she was always very bored and wanted to defeat him and do everything she could to surpass him. After listening, she replies that she is unsure if she is enjoying this but genuinely wants to defeat him. However, what significance does that hold for her? After this, he points his sword at her and tells her that she sees his plan to match her stubbornness and never give up, which will be a battle of power. After this, she uses her magic and builds a throne of ice to attack him, saying she will pour all her influence upon him. However, in the Harem Academy's hall, news reporters were there, and they were answering the question from Professor Pugman. From a side, a question arises, is being a magic swordman really that incredible? When he asks this question, everyone turns to look at him. After this, he asks everyone there if he said something weird, and someone there replies, is he being severe? He doesn't know what a magic swordsman is at this. He replies he knows, but just utilizing magic and a sword is a bit. He doesn't understand how that is supposed to be incredible. While looking toward him, the professor said that allows him to explain then and then start to explain by saying that it may seem like it's not a big deal in most people's eyes. However, what he needs to understand is that they are not just simply using both magic and sword at the same time. Then he gives them an example, saying suppose there are only 2 types of people in this world, a person who can run and a person who can walk, and let's say the person who runs is the swordsman and the person who walks is the mage. And does he think the person who walks can catch up to the person who runs? He questions them and answers them himself by saying the answer is it's impossible they will ever be able to catch up. So, in that case, what does he think that person will need to do? Then he tells the mage that he will utilize magic to reduce this difference. They will use various spells to catch up to the person who runs, which is how a mage makes up for their difference. However, he asks the professor what if a sworder can also utilize this magic and what he thinks will happen if the person who is running is now able to run even faster. Then, the difference between those two will exist once more. At this, the professor nods his head in yes, and then he explained that the person who could only walk after utilizing magic would become a bit faster. But if the person who is already running fast is the first place utilizing magic to become even faster, and the person who walks will never be able to catch up, and that is the limit for mages and the incredibleness of a magic swordsman. And then by summing up the topic he tells, so that's what a magic swordsman is. On the other side, Desir was looking toward the ice palace that a jest had created to attack him. While looking at it, he thought the surroundings, objects, and atmosphere were all starting to freeze, and within this confined space, she could analyze numerous spells. This magic is something that the future Adjust used quite often. She would use this magic whenever she felt cornered, and a space was created just for her from the throne of ice. Then he imagines his sword clashing with ice pillars so that if she can successfully establish this space, she can simultaneously analyze and cast hundreds of different spells. After this, he uses his sword and heats the skin to melt the ice and analyze her magic. By saying so, she reveals her trump card. She is amazing indeed. However, she won't be able to defeat him with just this. Seeing this, she angrily attacks him with her magic again. Suddenly, a large, pointed pillar of ice emerged from the floor where he stood. He jumped from there, but as he moved ahead, wherever he moved, the huge pillars of ice came out of the floor, and then she attacked him from above while immobilizing his movement. But he analyzed her magic again. Seeing this, she becomes angry and thinks she can't believe this many spells instantly. What must she do to defeat him? She knows she is not giving him room to prepare himself. She even attacks him randomly, increasing her attacking speed and numbers. She worries about thinking no matter how fast she casts her magic, and he analyzes it instantly. After this, she thinks of a method that he can't analyze. After thinking a lot, she gets to the result that she should use swordsmanship. But is there any sword magic that can't be analyzed? While standing at the distance, he thinks it's good for her to keep thinking and find a method that she can use to defeat him. And he knows she will become even stronger now. And when she attacks him by applying magic to her sword, he gets surprised to see and think this isn't magic. While Adjust thinks she shouldn't have been fixed on only casting magic at him and applying magic to her sword, she needs to infuse her magic with her sword. On the other side, the fight continued between Pram and Percival. Also, in Romantica and Donovan, Pram gets a little injured by Donovan's attack. She asks Pram if he is okay while getting ready for the fight, and he replies he is fine. Romantica thinks while looking toward Donovan, that person is incredible, a sworder equipped with magic gears. She never expected them to be this strong. Even after taking on 2 people at once, he's barely phased. After this, she looks toward Percival and thinks if that spiky-haired guy had joined him earlier, they would have been in some serious trouble. And now they needed to hurry and eliminate him and Percival. However, Donovan asks Percival to come with him to defeat them. At this, he replies with a smile. After getting beat to a pulp, he requires his assistance. Donovan angrily tells them he should shut his mouth up. He doesn't want to drag this out any further, and then Percival jumps toward them to attack by saying whatever he says he wants since he rests quite a bit. But he is ready to go wild again. Romantica, while shouting, tells Pram that she will try to stop him from getting closer to them. Meanwhile, Percival throws his magic sword toward them, but Pram blocks his sword with his rapier. Meanwhile, Donovan jumps to fight Romantica, and Percival hits Pram so hard that he falls away. While holding his sword, Donovan was about to attack her by saying stop trying to pull some useless gimmicks. They were both about to attack Romantica as both of them stood around her with their swords, and she stood in the middle, her fingers pointing toward their eyes while attacking them with her checkmate magic. Then, on Desir's side, the clock tower was affected by their magic. Also, the clock gears started moving fast, and Desir was worried to see how Adjust was using swordsmanship. He thought he had been trying to allow her to grow and develop her skills even more, but she exceeded his expectations, and he never expected her to advance this quickly. While looking toward her as she held her magic sword, he thinks the final offensive technique that a magic swordsman can talent under normal circumstances. She would have learned this skill 10 years from now, but she learned this skill right now. He couldn't believe she earned this on her own without any assistance, and he considers her amazing. Also, when she moves forward, he thinks since maintaining the magic sword requires a lot of mana, she won't be able to maintain the usage of her Ice Palace magic spell. After dropping his sword from his hands, he thinks he won't be able to do anything against her because he was scared and as he accepts his defeat. She moves toward him with an ice wave. She comes too close to him and, while putting her icing sword on his shoulder, tells him it's her wind, Desire. But the Ice Palace starts melting due to Desire's fire magic, and when she looks up toward the clock tower, and the time was 2 o'clock, she says it can't be. Then, an announcement is made that the Shadow World has been cleared. Also, the ranks have been determined after looking at participation and player elimination points. People in the stadium were surprised to hear that the first Shadow World was over. Then the announcement was made that first place was Desir Arman, second place was Adjust King's Crown, and third place was Pram Schneider. While the people in the stadium asked one another as they said Desire was first place, it meant he won. People from the Alpha class were angry because they couldn't bear Desire's victory, and Professor Pugman angrily threw his stick away by saying it was impossible. However, all the professors were gathered in the head dean's room, and those at Alpha class's side were shouting because they couldn't bear how Desire defeated the greatest party of this academy. Professor Pugman was shouting in the head's room, where the head's assistant approached the head and asked him if he should go at this head. Dean replied by saying, "Just let it be, because it's obvious he was going to act like that in the situation they are in right now." The assistant says with tears in his eyes that he also didn't expect this to happen either, and the head, while taking a deep breath, replies that this will be hard. Professor Pugman, while pressing his hand hard on the table, asks about Professor Bridget as she uses some shady methods. How a commoner defeating a magic sorter to rank first place doesn't make any sense. After this, the professor beside him agrees with Professor Pugaman and says there must have been some foul play. After this, a professor sitting in front of them asks if he claims that Professor Bridget knew the best information beforehand and shares that knowledge with them if he has proof, as he also saw how the battle went and no foul play was involved. At this, he shouts and replies, proving that she used another method to hide that from them, and how can a tier 1 magic circle commoner fight a magic sorter? Then the professor says everyone there saw how that battle went without missing a second, and then he asks if anybody saw some foul play there. After this, the assistant there asks him to stop as he assembles before the head dean. At this, Professor Pugman angrily looks toward the coach, and then he gives a notepad to everyone there by saying this is the head dean's notes and lists the contestants who will receive the single ranker title from the head dean. However, the conversation continues. A professor asks the head if he has already decided upon the titles. Then why are they having this meeting? The head politely replies that it is because he wants first to hear the opinion of the professors, even if the opinions are groundless remarks. Professor Pugam surprisingly stood up while making groundless remarks. One of them asked permission to read that out loud, and he started by telling everyone there that the 9 contestants would receive the single ranker title, and the conversation continued. After this, in the Starling dorm's main lobby, where Desire and Adjust sat facing each other, Desire tells her that back then, it was already a little bit past 2 o'clock, and what that meant was well past the time for the demonic creature to spawn. At the same time, the gears inside the clock also stopped moving, and then she asks him that now that he mentioned that, but she remembers there was a time when she could no longer hear the sounds of the gears. Then he tells her that the type of magic that he can analyze is the type that can be cast, and the magic tower was a magic device to summon a demonic creature, and this tower itself was cast into existence by advanced magic. Also, forcing a confrontation wasn't a bad idea, but her loss occurred because she forgot about the main objective of the Shadow World. At this, she said he was telling her that instead of focusing on the battle against her, he was focusing on the whole situation. She gets sad while looking up and says it's her complete loss. After this, he replies she doesn't have to think that way, although his explanation of why she lost seems confident that he would have lost if her sword were a bit faster than his analysis. Pram and Romantica also come there, and then Pram adds that if that did happen, they would have avenged him. After this, Romantica said that because they were almost about to win their battles. After this, they come and sit beside Desire. While sitting aside from him, Romantica asks him if it wasn't just the 2 of them he wanted to meet. He replies with a smile, he wasn't just asking a jest about the advancement process, and then he lost track of time. Then, while looking toward a jest, she said well, in any case, she is their enemy, and they almost lost because of her. Then a jest replies that if that was enough to make her lose, then she wasn't qualified to be in the Alpha class in the first place. After listening to this, she angrily asks her what she just said to her. Desire tells Romantica sacredly and tries to explain that he means they did pass the exams, and now they will advance to the Alpha class. What Adjust was trying to tell her was that what they did was enough for them to qualify, and then she asked what she was trying to say, and if she did mean it that way, she would let it slide. Then he tells Romantica that, in all honesty, they were able to win because of her snipes, and then he thanks her for this. She angrily replies she doesn't need that kind of compliment from him. When Pram asks about himself, Desire praises him by saying he is also alarmed. After all this, Pram hugged him while Romantica angrily looked toward Desire. Then Adjust says she will take her leave while putting the letter on the table. She says this is an invitation letter from Professor Pugman, and he had to give it to him because they lost. However, before leaving, she asks Desire a favor. She knows this is shameless, but she wants a favor, and the favor is whether she can also attend his training sessions. Romantica adds by asking if she's serious right now. The answer is no. While looking toward Desire, Romantica asks him to say something to her, and when he says every morning at 6 a.m., they meet after class at the main doors of the training district. At this, Romantica starts shouting at him while holding his shirt. As Ajess leaves, she nods, and Pram asks Desire about the next plan. He explains that they should wait for the announcements regarding the placement exams. Romantica asks Desire, so if they advance to the Alpha class, does that mean their party will disband? He excitingly replies that she will leave their party after 1 month. She gets worried after listening to him. They tease her after hearing this, tears fall from her eyes, and then Pram asks her so that it would be the two of them, so both should do their best. Desire replied by saying, of course, the two of them. Romantica held her head after hearing their words. While looking toward Desire, she said he knew she would not leave, although he was so annoying. After this, Desire tells them that there's still discrimination towards beta class students, and from now on, since their party has the skills, they're going to say they're still commoners and help the students within the beta class. While listening to him, she thinks depressingly that, as always, he is only serious whenever he's talking about these kinds of issues. But that's not their business or something they should concern themselves with. After this, Pram starts teasing her again by saying, does that mean she is going to leave them at this? She angrily shouts. She is just saying it's something they shouldn't concern themselves with, but she will still help. Then, the conversation between them continued while Desire was quietly sitting in the chair between them. Desire worriedly thinks about the Shadow Labyrinth and the upcoming world-ending event, so until that time comes, he needs to grow his party even more because this time, he won't lose. Suddenly, the sound that Desire is heard from behind in their ears, and when Desire looks back nervously, this is Professor Bridget who holds him tightly from behind, saying she missed him so much. After some time, Desire asks her the reason for her coming there, and she says she came there because she has some good news to tell them. Suddenly, a magic circle forms above them, and when they look up, a huge cake appears in that circle. Pram and Romantica are surprised after seeing this. Then she tells them that's Beswald Bakery's special cake, and if they want to buy even a loaf of bread from this bakery, they must wait 3 days and 3 nights. While looking toward the cake, Romantica says she got a cake on top of that. And when Desire asks, isn't this a bit excessive? She says since she could withstand that arrogant fatty's crude behavior, and this much is enough. After this, when Desire asks about the arrogant fatty, she replies well, in any case, above all else while blinking her eyes, she tells them about when she first met Desire in an orphanage. She tells them one day, she went to an orphanage for a visit with another professor, and some children were running. One was holding a stick, and the other behind asked him to stop. Suddenly, a child from her back grabbed her gown, and when she looked back, she saw the child was a little upset while holding a magic book in his hand. The child was so cute, and when she asked him why he was sad, he didn't reply. While bending down, she asked him about the book in his hand, and then he said he wanted to learn magic. However, wiping her tears, she said Desire was so cute back, and she was so proud of him. Then, while giving them the Alpha class badge, she tells them that starting today, they are all students of the Alpha class. Also, they're the 217th single rankers. As soon as they heard these words, tears of joy in their eyes, Romantica shouted they did it, and now she doesn't have to eat that hard bread anymore. While closing his fist, Desire thinks they have moved one step closer. After this, in the evening, a frail territory somewhere within the continent where a man wearing a gown in his room lit a candle and has all the records of the contestant, and he thinks, waiting for the magic tower. The day came when Desire, Romantica, and Pram sat with Alpha class students to take a class where the professor explained everything on board while giving them a lecture. She explains to them that humanity is currently at war with the Shadow World, which has a cycle of 1 year and continuously devours the world they live in. Students were uninterestingly taking a class while some of them were sleeping. Then she says that due to this fact, the continents they live in have been reduced to nearly half their size. It's quite hard to believe for most people because they've been fighting back against the Shadow World about 99.9% of the time. She is sure this may seem like old and boring news for most, but everyone needs to understand that they could gain an advantage against the Shadow World, and not even half a century has passed. They were able to gain this advantage because they were able to utilize the magic gems. She explains that the discovery of magic became the turning point for humanity, which is agreed upon by every scholar. After this, she turns the light toward the projector and explains to them that they're the gems they can receive by clearing the mission objectives within the Shadow World. And these gems are not just their average gems, as they are pure mana essence in the form of crystals. Then she says that magic gems are constructed with 2 layers. The first layer is the outer mana constitution, and within that layer lies the second layer, the inner mana. However, the outer mana constitution blocks access to the inner mana, making it impossible to utilize. If they completely remove the outer mana constitution, the inner mana inside will dissipate into the air. However, 50 years ago, the Magic Tower created the enchant method, which resolved this dilemma. They drilled a minuscule hole within the outer mana constitution and applied a special technique to harness the mana that flowed from the inner mana. It is the special method patented by the Tower of Magic. Because of this discovery, they entered an era where everyone could equally prosper and benefit from using magic. While explaining everything on the projector, she adds by saying it became an era of high magic. Still, as always, there were some negative side effects as outlaws started to exist. As they wanted to steal these magic gems, this began the formation of an organization named the Outsiders. A hand appeared on the projector, and then she quickly turned it off, saying she thought it was too early for them to cover this topic. Then, summing up her lecture, she asked a question from a random student, Romantica, who was sleeping. When Ms. Freljord asks a question about who was the person who created the enchant method, Desire pushes her and makes her wake up. When the professor points to Romantica by saying the sleeping student is there, Desire tells her to pay attention to the lecture when she wakes up half asleep. However, when he tells her the answer, she angrily replies that she already knew that. And then she answers the professor by saying this was Jodexarian. After this, the professor tells her to sit down by explaining more about Jodexarian. Desire and Pram laugh at her by asking if she slept well while angry. After this, in conclusion, she said although the shadow has taken over a large portion of humanity's existence, it also brought about the magic gems, which allowed humanity to advance even further. One can view the shadow world as a double-edged sword, which is the important takeaway from today's lecture. They all get to stand up as the professor leaves the room. And after the class, when all the students leave, the professor thinks that she guessed nobody had any questions. Meanwhile, Desire, Romantica, and Pram come to her by introducing themselves. Desire tells her name, and they are single rankers and members of the same party. At this, the professor laughed by asking if the sleeping student was a single ranker, but it was a pleasure to meet them. While bowing in front of her, Desire replies that the pleasure is there for listening to her amazing lecture. When she asks them if they have any questions, Desire politely replies they don't have any questions, but they have something to request from her. Then she asks Desire whether he is perhaps asking if she would recommend him to the Tower of Magic, and he replies that it's similar. Then she sadly tells him that, unfortunately, the recommendation process is already over for this year, and she suggests he return next year. While showing the commission letter to her, he said they weren't there to ask for a recommendation. When she read the letter, Desire told her that all Haviran Academy's parties could receive compensation through commissions. While keeping her hand on the letter, she says that's not what she was confused about. She was just confused as to why he was giving this to her. After this, while giving her the pen, they ask if she can commission them, but she quietly takes the pen from him. Desire requests to communicate with them, but when she doesn't respond, he and Pram bend before her to request this. She puts her hand on her face and replies that she's not like this because of the lack of formality, but she doesn't understand what kind of commission they are discussing. Then Desire requests her again by telling her that on July 7th at 3 AM, after 10 hours, the Outsider will launch an attack at the Tower of Magic's Eluli branch. Listening to his words, Ms. Freljord gets scared, and then he tells her the purpose behind this attack is for them to steal the Tier 2 magic gem held within the Eluli branch, the Tier of Reganal. She furiously asks how he knows when he says what's important is that they know a way to prevent this from happening. While showing his hand, he requests her to commission them to the Tower of Magic. However, 10 hours later, in the city-state of Altea, in the main branch of the Tower of Magic, the annex of the Tower of Magic, a man was looking out of the one-way mirror. His guard came in a while, informing him they were in trouble, and the Eluli branch was under attack. However, it was nighttime in the street, and a boy was running while holding bread in his hand. Suddenly, someone hit him and fell him down while holding the bread up with his magic. The boy bent down before him, asking for forgiveness while his food was in his hands, and then the men gave him his hand and helped him get up. After this, the boy is terrified by the man, and when the man asks him about where he is headed with these 2 bags of bread, he replies with fear and panic that he has a younger sister at home, but she is unable to leave the house, and this bread is for her. Hearing this, the man replies it is a pity, but in any case, he advises him not to wander around this late at night, and his younger sister will probably be worried for him. The boy stands in front of him with his head bowed, and he replies that he understands and it won't happen again. The man extends his hand to return the bread, but he brutally smiles, drops the food from the bag, and stomps his feet on the food so hard that the whole food gets destroyed. At this, the boy starts crying, but this doesn't affect the man. Instead of being ashamed of his act, he straightens his gown with his hands and asks how unfortunate wandering around late at night will only bring about misfortune. After this, he left while the boy was crying, looking toward his bread. After some time in the Tower of Magic's Eluli branch, the same man takes out his mask from his gown and wears it, then orders his team to gather there. However, so many in numbers gather there while wearing the same mask, and then he orders them to commence fire. But he feels that his attack is returning toward them. Seeing this, he said that he guessed this is to be expected from the Tower of Magic and also what an admirable defense magic. After this, he orders iron maces to come to the front but thinks that the defense magic fortified by the enchant method is quite strong. But a voice comes from inside that he won't be able to withstand two different types of attack simultaneously. After this, iron maces break the doors with their weapon, and others commence fire and break the door. However, many people gathered there while holding weapons. Seeing this, the head said what a noisy bunch, and thought that some things seemed off even though their response was quick. It was way too fast, and everyone was able to prepare their weapons. But that didn't matter. However, he orders his companion to advance, and they all get invisible. However, while holding the gun, the people found them everywhere in the hall, saying they had come. On the other side, they all appear in the corridor. And the head standing there says those people are pretty stupid, and he can't believe they just left their inner passages unguarded. He laughed at how they all found them everywhere, and then he came close to the iron wall sensing system. He touched that box by using his magic of Earth Rage. However, the iron wall disappears, and the tier 2 magic gem is the tier of Regainal. While touching the rock, he said it was finally within his grasp, and that was as far as he would get. Meanwhile, Pram gets over there while holding his rapier and asks them to surrender themselves. When he tells them to surrender themselves, they start laughing while looking toward Pram as if he is a small kid. After this, the head asks Pram, as he knew about his attack beforehand, what his objective behind this attack was. However, looking toward the head, Pram thinks his bloodlust is intense, especially their lead with a scary mask. After this, he orders his team members to kill Pram, and they throw a wave of flame toward Pram, but he jumps and saves himself hard. While looking toward them, he thinks there are 4 mages and 2 sworders in total, and these mages are similar to Romantica. Also, as for the sworders, they are pawns, and they attack Pram with a fireball and ice spear, but Pram cuts through the magic with his rapier. They are surprised to see how he is cutting through their magic. While looking toward his sword, they think it must be an anti-magic sword, and then one of them orders other mages to come behind him to attack Pram. But he crossed them so fast while striking them one after the other. Then, the head entangles him with an iron chain on his leg, and Pram thinks he has never seen a magician utilize trap magic before. Suddenly, a doom fist from the ground attack Pram and throw him away. However, the head shout at him by saying, "Little boy, although his physical strength is quite impressive, doesn't he think he lacks quite a bit of experience?" Asking this, he binds Pram with an iron chain, but he jumps while asking if he thinks a slow attack like that will work on him. The head laughs, and suddenly, a wall is erected around him. He gets scared and says it's a dead end. After this, they are attacked by snipers and start running, and many of them get injured and die. The head gets scared by thinking of a magic attack that is not yet strong enough to pierce through armor, and it must be a mage around a tier 2 level. However, judging by the rate of this attack, it can't be the work of one person. When the magic attacks him, he orders his companion to shield him while on the other side. The walls around Pram start collapsing. Their head starts shouting before he can accomplish his goal. He won't be captured there. Pram ran to attack them while they were asking his boss to use his magic to support them because, at that rate, they would be subdued. Pram attacked them with his rapier, but they tried to block his attack with their weapon. Suddenly, big rocks started rising. While looking toward their head, Pram thought, as expected of the boss, he had something hidden in his sleeves. And suddenly, the floor started collapsing, divided into 2 parts. The guard was shouting for help and asking their boss to stop this by saying they were also being pulled in. When the floor collapsed, the head saved himself from the big rocks carrying all around him. Pram was about to fall, but he got up, holding a base while looking down. He asked Desir in any case, That should be enough. However, the head casts a circle on the ground with his magic, and from there, he descends into an underground pipe with water all around. He was standing in the water while holding a gem in his hand, thinking he was unsure what had happened. Even if it was the Tower of Magic, they should have been prevented from procuring this much information. Whatever, at least he was able to secure his objective there. While looking behind him, Desir adds that he says that once he has accomplished his goals, the head turns back to look at how he is there at this. Desir says the bread costs he has come there to collect from him. The leader angrily asks how he figured out his location. Desir replies he can track his location in real time, and that's because he has already marked him with his mana. Hearing his words, the head remembers when someone was running while holding bread, and then he replies by saying, hence, he was doing everything, including the suspiciously fast response from the Tower of Magic, the inexperienced boy, and the snipe attacks. However, he attacks Desir with his magic by saying he will make him regret opposing the Great Kraken, but he is surprised to see that his magic is not activating. Desir asked if he thought he could activate his trap magic when his trap magic was so simple to read. Kraken was sweating, thinking it couldn't be that. How could he be able to analyze his magic? That's impossible. How is a tier 1 magic circle magician? Like him, he shouldn't be able to explore his magic. With a smile, Desir said they had a debt to settle in his bread that he stepped on. Does he remember Kraken standing still, thinking there wasn't much he could do in this situation? Desir was surprised to see why Kraken was not coming close. Meanwhile, he showed him the gem and asked if he was there to take it back, and if he came any closer, he would destroy it and demolish it into pieces. And if he wants him to return this to him in one piece, then don't he dare come any closer. Listening to this, Desir signs and says then go and break it when Kraken gets surprised. Desir, while moving toward him, tells someone like him will never be able to break a magic gem as a lot of people sacrifice themselves for him to obtain this, and so what he thinks will happen to him if he returned empty-handed while he was stopping Desir to come closer to him. When Desir stands in front of him, Kraken gets angry. He is about to punch him by saying he will make him regret looking down upon him, but gravity controls him. He gets trapped as he worries about how this is possible, as this boy's analysis is unbelievably fast. It doesn't make sense as this boy is a tier 1 magic circle magician, but he was able to utilize a tier 4 magical gravity control. Thinking this, he fell away while the gem was in Desir's hand, and he said he would now be taking this back from him. Kraken shouts at Desir and then ponders, as the magic gem hasn't even been enchanted yet, why is it reacting to him? That, he asks Desir how to utilize the mana within the magical gem. Desir replies with a laugh that he knows it is pretty shocking, but he was in shock just like him when he first saw this technique, and if he wants, he can tell him about it. And when he nods at this, Desir asks him to first pay for his bread cost while lying in the water in gravity control. After this, in the meeting room where Desir, Romantica, and Pram were sitting, MS, Freljord appreciated Desir, saying if he was not there, they would have suffered an enormous loss, and also thanks to Desir's party members. Pram adds by saying that she didn't even believe in Desir in the first place, and then she replies that she can't imagine what would have happened if that magic gem fell into the outsider's hand. He doesn't even want to think about it. However, the conversation between them continued, and when Desir asked if it would be alright if they discussed the compensation for the commission, she replied with a smile that they would reward him 120 gold pieces for his commission. Hearing all this, Romantica laughed and said that's amazing, Desir, as he was complaining earlier that their budget for their party was pretty low, and with 120 gold pieces, they no longer have to worry about their budget. After this conversation, MS, Freljord bent her head down by telling them to be honest with him. They were initially planning on only giving out 100 gold pieces, but since he didn't believe him and treated him rudely, she added 20 more gold pieces as a token of apology. While giving him the gold pieces back, she said this reward could be better than receiving a recommendation from the Tower of Magic. Nevertheless, it is still a pretty good reward, and she hopes he will accept it. Then Desir asks her if she remembers what he told her that day after class, and when she remembers his words when he said they were not there to ask for a recommendation to the Tower of Magic. But then she told him why he was asking her this, and he replied that he would like to reject the 120 gold pieces. Hearing this, Pram and Romantica are shocked. Then he says he would prefer that he wasn't compensated with money. Instead, he has something else he would like to request for their compensation. Then she surprisingly asks him about the request for which he has rejected 120 gold pieces, and he replies by allowing him to play a chess match with the Tower of Magic's master, Jode Exarian. After some time in the city-state, Altea, the center of magic engineering and development, is the main branch of the Tower of Magic. MS. Freljord took Desire to this place with her and they entered the elevator there. She asked him if he was fine with just this, and when he asked what she meant by this, she said she was talking about his chess match, as it was just a little hard to understand. After achieving an amazing feat, he only wants to be compensated with a chess match. At this, he replies to each of their own, he supposes. She was surprised how he preferred this chess match over 120 gold pieces. Also, she is confused about what the Tower of Magic's master was thinking when he consented to their match, and then he asks her to bring that boy there. While on the way, Desire said that Jode has always been quite an odd fellow at this. She added that he was right, as the Tower of Magic's master has always been weird. After this, they ring the bell, and the door opens. After entering his room, she said the Tower of Magic's master had arrived while Jode was reading a book. Then she said she had brought the student she mentioned to him earlier, and he said she could leave him with him. While looking toward Jode, Desire thinks of the Tower of Magic's master as his real age is closer to 90. And his physical appearance resembles a 40-year-old man's. Also, it doesn't matter if it's the past or the future, but he will always be the strongest magician. He was the person who led human civilization to the great era of magic, and although he may be a person whose list of achievements is endless, he's his irreplaceable friend. After this, Jode asks him to sit, and then he asks Desire if he wasn't so pressed for time. He would have brewed some time and wanted a leisurely chess match with him. But 27 minutes from now, he has a meeting, and he has to go, so forgive him for his lack of hospitality. Desire adds that he is already thankful that he accepted his match. However, the conversation between them continues. While starting the chess match, Jode asks him about the chess rules and which one he prefers, the Imperial rule or the Western Kingdom's rules. Jode pauses the chess piece when Desire replies by saying he prefers the North Sea's rules. At this, he asks Desire if he doesn't look like he is from that area. At this, Desire replies with a laugh that he is correct, but a long time ago, he had a friend from that area, and thanks to him, he became proficient in the North Sea rules. Jode adds that how he said that makes him feel as if he was forced to learn those rules, and the North Sea rules are one of the toughest chess rules he can learn, which must have been quite difficult. Hearing this, Jode laughs and tells him to start playing with the North Sea rules. However, in the North Sea chess rules, the chessboard is wider by 5 rows, and because of this, there are more chess pieces to work with. The specialty of this chess style is that it requires numerous battle tactics, as it is very similar to real warfare. And rather than having a queen, there are 2 warships they can utilize. Another key feature is that if a pawn doesn't move for 1 turn, the row that the pawn is on forms a supply route. If any of their pieces enter the row that became a supply route, they can move twice in 1 turn and be given 4 bishops and 4 knights to use. After the match between the two at 4 o'clock, Desire asks him to allow him the first move. While playing the match, Jode looks toward Desire and thinks he is pretty good but too hasty with his moves. Desire was sweating, and then he asked Jode if he would like to make a bet with him. He replied that this was his main objective, and then he asked him what he wanted to bet. Desire replies with a smile. Then shall they make a bet where the loser has to comply with what the winner requests? Jode replies if he is going to request for him to allow his recommendation to be accepted, then he will have to decline taking part in his bet. And the rules are there for a purpose. He will not allow any exceptions. When Desire says it isn't that he doesn't have to worry about that, Jode adds that if his request isn't for him to accept his recommendation, he is quite curious about it. Also, doesn't this bet benefit Desire more than it does him? Just what use will a mere student provide for him? At this, Desire politely replies he can always assign him to do some odd work around the Tower of Magic. Although he may look like this, he ranked first in the single ranker titles amongst the first-year students. Jode says that's quite an impressive feat, and then, in that case, after he graduates, he will request for him to come and join one of his magic engineering departments. Desire replies then, as for his request, he will save it and tell it to him at the end because he has been told that he always saves the best present for last. However, hearing this, Jode says that's something he should say after overcoming his dire situation. As the match continues, they decide to pick the piece. Then, in that case, he will try his best to use everything he has to deliver his present to him. Jode gets a little bit confused to see how, all of a sudden, Desire has become a different person. As it is Desire's turn, Jode squeezes while looking toward him. Desire thinks that habit only comes out when he is worried, and it's not surprising that he is disconcerted. Also, he has been playing chess with him for over 6 years, and he remembers his chess match with him in that hellish world. He remembers when they were in a shadow world where they both were playing the same chess match. Also, a lot of people were gathered there. Some were on Jode's side and some were on Desir's. Tears come into his eyes when he remembers that time after this, Jode says it feels like he has become a completely different person at this. Desir replies he thinks so, but he has been the same person since the beginning. But Jode thinks he guessed that true since the start. Desir has just been himself as the game continued, and when Desir checkmates after losing the match, Jode says that was the longest 25 minutes of his life, and it's his loss, but that was a learning experience. Meanwhile, Jode's phone rang. He said his secretary called Desir, saying don't worry about him, feel free to answer that. However, it was time for his meeting. After hanging up the phone, Jode said he did not expect him to lose. After this, he asked Desir about his request, and replied he wanted to trade with him. When Jode asked him about trade, he replied he would offer him his idea in return for his sponsorship. And there were the two things he wished to trade for. When Jode said it was difficult, he requested the desired ads by saying he did lose the bet. But Jode disagrees, and then he says that's not the point. He said he wanted to make a trade with him. A trade happens when it equally benefits both sides of the party, and he is telling him that he wanted to make a trade between a student's idea in return for support from one of the greatest magic companies. He can't even call that a trade. Desir replies so he is saying if the trade is of equal value, then it's a fair trade. Then allow him to show him something. After this, when Desir looks here and there, his eyes suddenly fall on the gem. He asks Jode to borrow this magic gem for a second and permit him. After this, while picking the gem, Desir said those magic gems have yet to be enchanted, so they're pretty much useless stones at this point. While Jode thinks it's impossible to use a magic gem without enchanting it first. That's also just what he is planning to do with that. Jode is surprised to see how the magic gem in Desir's hand rests even though it is not enchanted. After this, Jode asks if he can see that for a second, and when Desir gives it to him, he is surprised to see it still reacting. When Jode asks him what he did to it, suddenly, his secretary's voice comes from Magic Gem, and he asks if there is an issue with the master. At this, Desir tells him that Magic Gem can be used as a transmitter. While Jode was shocked to see this after putting this magical gem on the table, Jode replied to the call that he would get back to him in a second. Then he asks Desir to explain what he did while he asks with a smile if that means he is willing to trade with him now. Jode replies with a smile. He would be crazy if he didn't accept his trade after what he witnessed. On the other side, Romantica and Pram went to Veskin 79 for shopping. Desir also went over there while they both were eating ice cream. When Romantica asks him about his chess match, he replies the match was good, then he asks how about them at this, and she replies she thinks shopping there is nice. After this, when Desir says they are done eating, they can shop some more and have fun before leaving. Pram replies while a tear falls from his eye that they didn't bring enough money. After this, they don't have to worry about money when Desir shows them the Jode credit card. They both get very excited, and when Desir asks if he wants to eat some ice cream too, they look toward him angrily, while Romantica holds his hand and starts moving from there by saying he can eat later. While riding there, they were delighted, thinking it was fine to take a break occasionally. However, the day left until the first Shadow World opens. After some days in the Dresden capital of the Haviran Empire at Duke Nifileka's villa, there was a party at nighttime, and only nobles were allowed to attend the party. Professor Pugman came there while holding the wine glass, announcing that today was the special day for 3 consecutive years. Their Blue Moon party has been recognized as the most fantastic party in Haviran Academy by the Tower of Magic. Also, once again, for this year, they have been blessed with another promise of support by the Two of Magic. And this will only be the beginning. They will continue to become the most extraordinary party as their legacy will go down in history. And they all celebrated and cheered the wine as this was an excellent day for nobles. While a Jess stands aside alone, some boys get close to her, saying she is a real lady and it's an honor for them to meet her, and then they all start teasing her. Meanwhile, Alheim comes there and laughs, saying the boys standing near the lady also what an unruly sight. They all get angry to see him after this, and one asks him angrily who he is and why he came there. Then he replies that he is Alfheim Triquincy, who has already planned to be with that lady tonight. She is surprised to see him because she doesn't know him. However, he asked her if they agreed to meet each other earlier, and as mentors and mentees during the entrance exams. They also planned to catch up with a recent event at this node, and the boys around her got angry to see that she was leaving from there. After this, they both come to the terrace. Alfheim asks her if it seems she is dissatisfied with the party, and when she replies that it's at this, he says he is not there to criticize her, but he feels the same. Then she tells him that she thought he disliked commoners. At this, he replies that from a personal standpoint, he does, but he doesn't publicly display his dialogue like those guys over there. But he doesn't know what Professor Nifaleka is thinking. She replies that he has numerous ulterior motives hidden behind whatever he does. While smiling, he adds by saying the ulterior explanations he just mentioned. Then she tells the nobility of pride and the fear that they will be overthrown one day, and these two are very easy to manipulate. And if he agitates these people with these feelings, they are quick to lose control of themselves. When she said because of what happened, Bates asked about Donovan and said no matter what happens, he would become like Professor Pugman. Then he asks her, in any case, what's important that a professor can earn at this? She says she is sure he knows perfectly well that garnering influence is the most important thing they can earn at this. He said he knows that. However, he wonders if he's trying to repeat what happened in the past once more as Pugman's family 12 years ago when the Empire was in the midst of a civil war. His family was one of the 5 families that supported the current emperor at the time, Gillian Jedgar F. Rogopalis. Also, at that time, the lord of the Pugman family was Braham Nifaleka. Numerous coups d'etat occurred within the capital, but he was raised as a duke due to his support and contribution. During the Civil War, he executed over 80,000 commoners, and if a commoner was suspected ever so slightly of being part of the Republic, then regardless of their age and gender, he would just execute them, and the Pugman family became known as the ones who instigated the mass genocide. However, the conversation continued. Meanwhile, Professor Pugman came over, saying he was looking for them. At this, Alheim replies they came out to enjoy the evening breeze for a bit. However, with a smile, the professor said he shouldn't leave the party unattended. Many honorable guests came there because they wanted to meet him, especially the daughter of the Red Wing family she had been looking for earlier. While laughing, he puts the wine glass aside and replies how rude of him he made a lady waiting for him. Then the professor orders him not to spend his time out on the terrace, go back in, and dazzle the guests at the party. Professor puts his hand on his shoulder and looks hatefully toward him as he walks past him to return to the party. With a hateful smile, the professor thinks it would be wise to be more careful with what he says while looking toward Professor Alheim. He thinks he is acting like this because he reveals the true nature of his family status. While pulling his hand away from his shoulder,